So welcome once again in this new Viisi Talk live stream. My name is Gijs. I'm your host for today. This is actually the first live stream talk in English, as we have a special guest, Melanie Rieback, on this live stream. A warm welcome to you, Melanie.
Thank you.
Thanks for being with us. Melanie is the founder and CEO of Radically Open Security, a non-profit computer security agency. And that mouthful actually brings you places, because I heard that you just got out of a call with representatives of the European Union. Is that correct?
Yeah, we just got off a call with the European Commission, which was a retrospective of a pen test that we did of the Dutch Corona Melder, the COVID-19 contact tracing app. And I don't know if any of you have seen the news lately, but in the Volkskrant and also on Nu.nl, there was just an interesting article that came out that was discussing some of the concerns from our pen test report. So yeah, it's been a really crazy last 24 hours for us. So
can imagine. Yeah, I can imagine. Yeah. A very interesting topic, but that's not the topic actually of today's talk. For those of you who have seen VPRO's Tegenlicht the other week, Melanie was featuring in that episode as well, talking about the business model of the still dominant business model of exponential growth. And she was actually proposing an alternative, which is more sustainable actually for people and planet. But Melanie can give you all the information about that. One last message before I give the floor to Melanie is, if you have any questions or comments, please put them in the YouTube chat, which is below or besides or above, depending on your device. Put in your questions there, your comments. I will collect them and forward them to Melanie after her presentation. So without further ado, the floor is yours, Melanie.
So thank you very much. So I believe I have about 25 minutes to talk to you all. And yeah, all I can say is it's really been quite a journey. Of course, my head is a bit full at the moment with everything that's going on with the Corona Melder and the audit. It's just because, this morning, of course, the Tweede Kamer had a discussion. Also, the Eerste Kamer is having a discussion about it later this week. So it's really nice that we're in a place that we're able to help shape the public discourse on this. Now, the funny thing is, we are doing this as a not-for-profit company. And of course, this is the reason why I was invited to talk with you all today, to tell you about our slightly unusual business model. So, Radically Open Security, first of all, is set up as a social enterprise. So I started Radically Open Security quite simply because I was a bit discontented with some of the incumbents on the Dutch security market. Oftentimes with security companies, they do tend to work with intelligence agencies, build surveillance solutions, hack activists, or otherwise, act as kind of non-transparent black boxes, of the kind where you typically get from the big accountancy firms, where they sort of come in and they're like, yeah, we're the experts, you stand back, we're going to solve everything for you, and then send you a large invoice, and a report. So, of course, in security, security is a mindset. Security is a process. So security is not just a set of band-aids that you receive in penetration test reports. So after I dealt with some of these security consultancy companies when I was working in the cybercrime team of ING, I realized that, I think that we can do better, So that's when I started Radically Open Security about 6.5 years ago. And really, our objective was to create a company that focuses on openness, on transparency, and also upon our commitment to open source. So basically, all of the tools and frameworks, all of the software, all the trainings, all of the documentation that we that we create gets published in either our GitLab or our GitHub repositories online with Creative Commons or GPL licenses free of charge. So that's one thing. Another thing also is that our penetration testing workflow that we designed is called Peek Over Our Shoulder. And what this means is we invite customers into our chat rooms so that they can listen along with our penetration testers as we are breaking their stuff. So of course, this is like really super entertaining to see, exactly how we're busy hacking you. But the more important thing is that it's also really educational. And we're optimizing for knowledge transfer. We're optimizing for conveying that hacker mindset, because of course, if developers or sysadmins or DevOps folks or anyone really can watch us and interact with us and interface with us while we're doing this, then they themselves can start to think like hackers, and therefore they will make the same mistakes far less often. So it turns out that this openness and transparency is actually really popular, because it, in a way, is kind of like getting a free training with every penetration test that you buy, with every security audit. So as a result, in 6.5 years' time, Radically Open Security members. We have over 100 customers, and we are the only Dutch first supplier, basically, for the Netherlands, for Google. We also do work for Mozilla for their open source security program, the MOS program, where we audit a lot of open source and civil society stuff. But also for Dutch government. I mean, as I mentioned, work for the European Commission. We're not only testing Corona Melder, but also for the European Commission, we've tested several other countries, COVID apps, Immuni in Italy, Protogo in Poland. We're also testing the Google Apple exposure notification API. We're also testing the interoperability framework. So it's really great, that we're able to do these kinds of high-profile jobs. But we also do jobs for typical companies. I mean, we everything from supermarket chains, banks, insurance companies, telcos, SMEs, hosting providers, software companies, all the way down to startups, smaller SMEs, many of whom are completely non-technical. And also we do not-for-profit work at cost price for nonprofits, NGOs, and civil society. And we kind of use tiered pricing in the sense that the large corporations pay our highest prices, and basically the smallest guys and the nonprofits basically pay next to nothing. And in such a way, the commercial jobs kind of keep our wheels spinning, while at the same time the smaller players then can get serviced by this engine that we have turning. So, this is a good way of structuring things, but beyond being a social enterprise, I mentioned that we are a not-for-profit company. So what that means is we are we're basically donating our profits for almost in their entirety to charity. So we have taken a business model from the Dutch church. So there's this really obscure Dutch tax construction called a fiscaal fondswervende instelling in Dutch, a fiscal fundraising institution. And sometimes a church wants to do a commercial spin-off, and then they do some kind of commercial activity, and they raise some money, and that money goes for at least 90% back to the church again. Now, a famous example of this is the Language Institute, Regina Caeli, otherwise known as the Nonnen van Vught. The nuns started the Language Institute. The Language Institute is independently operating, super high quality. I mean, it's where our Queen Maxima in the Netherlands learned her Dutch. And then, the profits go almost in full back to the nuns. So we basically took that construction and we decided to make our commercial spin-off a security consultancy company. And we decided to make our so-called church the NLNet Foundation. And the NLNet Foundation is a internet-related charity who supports open source digital rights, and everything for a better internet. So they support projects like Tor, GNU, EFF, Jitsi, DNSSEC, WireGuard, and a lot of different kinds of projects like that. So they're basically a funding agency. In the last 6 years of Radically Open Security's existence, we have donated over 250,000 euros to the NLNet Foundation. So, this is kind of the exact opposite of philanthropy. Because typically with philanthropy, the idea is first you get rich off of your company, and then you donate. But actually, rather, we're doing it sort of opposite. We're doing it the other way around by building that donation into the core of our business model. In as such, what we're trying to do is to decouple profit motive from the operational vehicle of business with the objective of re-envisioning business as a vehicle for pure positive impact. Now, of course, when we first started this and put radically open security on the commercial market, everybody thought we were crazy because they were like, well, as a non-commercial player, as a not-for-profit company, who's going to trust you? Well, as you can tell from our track record by now, from Google to the Corona Melder, I mean, a lot of parties trust us. But if you think about it, it's actually really not that surprising because openness and transparency, of course, lead to trust in your vendors, as well as, the lack of a profit motive gets people to understand that our real reason for existence is delivering social value, and that's value for our customers, value for our staff members, value for society. And this is very, very different than the typical kinds of companies that inhabit both the Dutch security market, but also business in general these days. After going through all of these acrobatics, getting radically open security started, I really started seeing some more general things about business and also about the startup ecosystem in general. And around that same time, I started doing a lot of reading of economists. And of course, there's this really great wave of economists that exist, and they're called post-growth economists. So, for example, some of you might be familiar with Kate Raworth. So, she is a really fantastic Oxford economist who wrote a book called Donut Economics. And she's actually been doing some great work also here in Amsterdam with, the Amsterdam City Donut. And basically, her point is that, we're trying to find a balance, find a kind of middle place in between environmental, planetary boundaries and also social concerns. So I highly recommend her book for anyone who is interested. Another economist that I ran into fairly quickly was Tim Jackson. And Tim Jackson wrote a book called Prosperity Without Growth. It's arguable that he could sort of be called the father of the post-growth economics movement. And the whole idea with post-growth economics is that they are asking questions like, is growth good? Really fundamental question, and in terms of economists, they tend to look at macroeconomics and more specifically at the gross domestic product of companies. So, for example, oftentimes when you're looking at the G7, I'm sorry, the G10, and you're looking at questions about, what are the best performing countries, of course, we're judging these countries based on their GDP. Now, there's always these, curves, and in particular with GDP, there's this, it always has to be sort of like up and to the right, so it kind of has to be, this growth like that. What happens, of course, if it flattens? This is when we have recessions and layoffs and suffering, and but we don't ask very often, why is this the case? So the post-growth economists explain that there is so much extraction happening from our economy that actually our economy needs to keep growing just to maintain a steady state. Now, the question of, how do we then, build flat economies where the economy can thrive even at a point is not when it's not growing? These are incredibly relevant questions, and especially for right now in the current world that we're living in with the COVID-19 pandemic. We have already, been in a position earlier this year when the stock market, crashed. Of course, since then, the stock market has more than recovered, but what's becoming incredibly evident is that there is a disconnect like never before, between Wall Street and also between the Main Street economy. So, but the problem is if you have a look at business education, um, like the average MBA program or entrepreneurship program at a university, or also at startup incubators, you realize that startups are being taught to be aspiring unicorns. You know, I mean, this concept probably shouldn't surprise anyone. I mean, our Prince Constantine here in the Netherlands, he says things like, the Netherlands needs to become a country of unicorns. Like, okay, but let's stop and investigate this, and let's stop and think about what it actually means to be a country of unicorns. Now, first of all, if you look at some of the most prominent unicorns of the kind that we have from Silicon Valley, the problem with a lot of these is that they are revenue losing. So if you look at companies like Uber, like Airbnb, also of course WeWork is one of the most notorious cases. But basically, these companies are in a way treated like battery chickens in Dutch, like plofkippen. In other words, they are injected, they are like force fed artificially with investment capital so that they can plump up, preferably exponentially, for 3 to 5 years. After that point, then they are led to the slaughter, also called liquidation by VCs, at which basically the company, the financial value is pulled out of the company, and this financial is pulled out during IPOs or direct listings, mergers or acquisitions, but also by things like dividends and stock buybacks. Um, After the value has been pulled out of a company, then what tends to be left of that company after the fact tends to be a shell. Because getting taken over, getting acquired, or also with IPOs, whether you're getting one small boss or 1,000, large bosses, it is really hard to maintain the culture of your company after such an event. And also the acquiring entity may or may not actually have the same interests as the original founders. And of course, this makes it particularly hard if you're trying to run a social company, anything like a social enterprise. And of course, this whole capital scale exit model, which is what I call the Silicon Valley model, this is also something that is pervasive also within the social entrepreneurship ecosystem. Because as much as the commercial incubators tend to put an emphasis on investment and funding and pitch decks, and all of these kinds of things. You actually do find the same emphasis as well throughout the impact ecosystem. Because if you go to the local impact incubators, oftentimes they also will be teaching about impact investment. And of course, you also have impact exits. It, of course, this becomes evident and problematic. One of the more famous cases in the social enterprise space is of Ben and Jerry's, a famous B corporation, getting acquired by Unilever. Of course, Ben and Jerry's had investors, impact investors, at the very beginning, and the question then is, did Ben and Jerry actually want to sell to the Unilever? Many people think they didn't, and the reason why they had to sell is because their investors forced them to. This kind of thing happens again and again. So, we've also here in the Netherlands also had a recent case of Markt, M-A-R-Q-T. I'm sure that you all are familiar with them. Of course, they have really nice stores all over the Netherlands. They sell really yummy products, of whom I shouldn't consume too many of. But it's also a similar story. Marked had impact investors. But of course, as with many Silicon Valley style companies, they grew faster than their revenue would support, which would basically mean that they were revenue losing. At a certain point, their investors said, well, okay, it's time to move on to the exit now so we can make good on all of these losses. But then the CEO of Marked said, well, actually, I don't want to sell the company. Now the investors they insisted upon selling to Ecoplaza, and the CEO tried to block this. What wound up happening was that the CEO, well, first of all, they wound up selling Marked to Ecoplaza. That wound up happening in either case. But then they fired the CEO, and then they accused him of negligence because they were revenue losing, and then they stripped him of all of his shares of his company, leaving him with nothing. Welcome to social enterprise. So as you can see, this whole capital scale exit model, this is completely unhelpful for trying to run also social businesses. And when we start looking at social enterprises, we start seeing the problems with financial extraction. I mean, I think that in a way, financial extraction is kind of like, the original sin of business. And, this is conveyed, I think, in a very interesting story that's called The 11th Round by one of these great economists whose name is Bernard Lietaer. Now, his story is as follows. There was a village in the outback who had a market, and they traded chickens and cows and all kinds of different goods. Now, one day, a stranger with white shoes, I'm sorry, with shiny shoes and a white hat shows up, and he says, the way that you guys are doing all this trading, this is completely inefficient. So please bring me a cowhide. Then come back in a week and I'll help you all to work more efficiently. Now they come back in a week and the stranger has cut coins, essentially, what he calls rounds, out of the cowhide. And now there's 10 families. And what he did is he cut out 10 coins per family. And then he gives each of them these coins. And he says, well, take these. Now you can exchange the coins rather than exchanging, the chickens. Now each round is worth one chicken, and this is going to make your lives a whole lot easier. So the villagers did this. And of course, they were happy with the results because, yeah, I mean, now they didn't have to carry around chickens anymore. It was far more convenient. So they went back to the stranger and they were super thankful, and they said, wow, this is such an amazing innovation. How can we thank you? So the stranger said, well, you know what you can do for me? I'm going to come back in 1 year time, and what I want you to do is I want you to pay me back an 11th round. And then they said, well, okay, but where are we supposed to get that 11th round from? We only have 10 rounds. And he said, well, just wait. You'll see. So, at that point, the families were left with a few options. The first option was essentially to cut out one of the 10 families, so that basically each of the 9 families would have 11 rounds. That was certainly one way of doing it. A second way of doing it possibly was to default on the stranger. Or the third possible way they could handle this would be to breed more chickens, given that, of course, every every chicken is worth 1 round. Now, they decided in the end that they did not want to hurt anybody, so they would try to breed more chickens. So, the stranger came back at the end of the year, and each of the 10 families had 11 rounds, and they paid the stranger back. And the stranger was like, great, wonderful, fantastic. For next year, what I'm going to do is instead of giving you 10 rounds, now I'm going to give you, even more rounds. And then I'm going to come back in a year again. So you can then pay me back with 11 rounds for every round that I give you. Now, the problem that emerged here was that at a certain point, after a year or two, the entire village started getting overrun by chicken poop. And in fact, all people ever ate was chicken anymore, and they had feather pillows, chicken feather pillows, and people were just starting to get sick of all of these chickens, and they wanted to eat beef or some other things instead, you know. But the problem was, this extraction, this financial extraction that was now, leaving the city and now going to this stranger. First of all, it created competition amongst the families. In other words, by cutting one family out, the other families can benefit. So that really made them inclined to want to work together less and to, try and get ahead individually more. And the other problem, of course, was what you would call, the environmental so-called externalities. I mean, it created this disimbalance, this imbalance in which, uh, now they were basically breeding because their productivity had to increase faster than the interest rate with which they were paying this stranger, and this is sort of like why, with the Bible and saying, that money, the love of money is the root of all evil. This is the reason why, at least three of the major religions, Christianity, Islam, Judaism, all consider interest bearing loans, and certainly excessively interest bearing loans, otherwise known as usury, to be a sin. But somewhere along the lines, we started accepting the fact, the idea that this financial extraction is not only okay, but that it's somehow justified. And this got us really into the position that we're in right now, where we have, the modern society as it is. We have the 99% and the 1%. See, this financial extraction that we have from our economies, and also on one level layer down from this is what creates the 99% and the 1%. Now, the only way really, to keep this kind of never-ending growth, to be able to keep it up, is by monetizing the commons. Okay, so there is, of course, the earth is the most prominent version of the commons. If you think about protected areas, forests, but also food supplies, water, air, all of these things belong to all of us. Similarly, another form of commons that tends to get monetized are things like human relationships, things that we used to do for each other for free, just because we wanted to support each other. These things are getting monetized. Also things like culture, bards and minstrels used to sing for free, and now all of a sudden, we've got these business models that are commoditizing and selling things like music and art, and theater, so this also can go into this economic growth. So, and this leads us to ask, the question that also, what role can degrowth play? So there is also, beyond there being a post-growth movement, there's also a degrowth movement. Uh, and the degrowth movement essentially asks, not only can we build flat economies, but can we actually build economies that would decrease in their total value? Of course, people who don't understand the nuances would listen to this and think, yeah, but that makes absolutely no sense. Why would we want our economies to shrink? But if you think about it, when an economy shrinks, what you're doing is you are taking, the monetized economy. And the question that I have is, can you take companies and use these as agents for degrowth? Which in other words means, can you take these companies and use it to colonize the monetary economy and then to redirect that back into the commons, to rebuild the commons, to rebuild the human relationships, to rebuild all of the open and shared things that belong to all of us. In this more of a concrete way, I think actually what we're doing with radically open security, is an agent of degrowth in that sense, because what we're doing is we are colonizing, in our particular case, the Dutch computer security market, that up until now has been, occupied by commercial companies, by accountancy firms, you know, and what we're doing is we are basically, in other words, like, we're winning RFPs, we're encroaching on their business, and we're taking their customers, and we're also taking their staff, away from this commercial ecosystem. What we're then doing is we're taking the profits from that and again giving this to NLNet, which is basically again redirecting this back towards things like open source. Now, with innovation, I think we need to question the word innovation. Because as it's taught in business school and as it's taught in business incubators, we learn, when we're trying to be innovative, that we need to find things to monetize. So startup incubators will tell you things like, think about human relationships that exist that you can make a startup and or find a business model for, or, that take, also these, again, these bits of commons and be able to monetize this. Do we need this form of innovation? Or rather, do we need some kind of like, anti-innovation, that basically again takes the economy and converts it back into the commons again? I think that these are relevant questions that we should be asking, but it's the kind of discourse that very rarely ever comes up. So, in thinking about also business education, I think that we need to pay attention to the amount of ideology that is embedded into the business tools that we're receiving. So, Occupy Wall Street, if you all remember them, they had a walkout of EC10 from Harvard University, which was the introduction to economics class from Professor Gregory Mankiw. Now, the students, they were in the front row and they stood up and then they said, "We do not want the ideology that you are teaching in this class." And then they walked out. Now, they realized that in our education, we are receiving a lot of embedded, neoliberal ideology that is completely not helpful for trying to get us as a society where we need to go. And they recognize also that we need to learn how to update our economics educations. Out of this walkout sprung many student groups like Reinventing Economics and also the Post-Crash Economics Society, where they literally have been reevaluating how can we rewrite our economics curriculum to sort of bring it up into the modern century. My question also for you guys is why have we not been having any walkouts from our business schools? And similarly, why have we not been having any walkouts from our business incubators? Because there's exactly the same problem here. With our learning how to found startups and incubators, and also with our MBA programs, there are equal measures of ideology mixed in with the tools that we receive. And until we can consciously in our minds be able to separate out that ideology from the tools, we're not going to be able to make good decisions. So, this also comes back to the business models of incubators. If you think about it, many incubators tend to take equity in their own startups. So, what this means essentially is that they're playing the dual role of educator as well as also of investor. So, I work sometimes with the Amsterdam Center of Entrepreneurship, ACE, which is the incubator of the academic university system in the city of Amsterdam. And because they are government funded and not extremely commercial, I've been teaching to their startup founders, also in their startup bootcamp, about more social business ideas and post-growth business ideas. Now, I went one time to a different commercial incubator who will not be named, and I said to them, hey, I'm giving these classes to ACE. To their founders and their cohort during startup boot camps. I'd be super happy to do exactly the same for you, free of charge. Not gonna charge you a penny for it. They thought about it, and then they said, well, actually, I'm not sure that our investors would like this because see, our incubators investors are investment banks like Merrill Lynch. So I'm really sorry, but I don't think they would like what you have to say. So we have to respectfully decline. You know, if ever there were a more obvious, case, sort of illustration of that financial conflict of interest in incubators, that's it. So I think what we need to do is we need to think about how to rewrite the business curriculum. You know, there's a good book, basically by Martin Parker. He wrote this article called "Bulldoze the Business School," and he also extended that into a full length book where he looks at the business curriculum and to make some suggestions in how to remove some of that neoliberal ideology. Similarly, I think, in terms of the Silicon Valley model of capital scale exit, I think we need to look at things differently. And I created a class at the Free University of Amsterdam in the business school called Post Growth Entrepreneurship. Now, there's basically three things at the basis of post growth entrepreneurship. It's sort of the polar opposite of capital scale exit of the Silicon Valley model. Step one is bootstrapping. In other words, starting your company without investors. Step two is flat growth. This is basically slow organic growth for the long term, which is the polar opposite of exponential growth. The third step is non-extraction. So basically asking the questions, how can we build businesses where we are not extracting the financial value? Now, this sounds like a bit of an odd question, but I'm not the first person also to have asked it. Also, the economist Muhammad Yunus, of course, he's a Nobel Prize winner, so he's probably as familiar to many of you. He invented microfinance. He founded the Grameen Bank, and he also created the concept of social business. And he defines social business as follows: no dividend companies for solving human problems. Of course, the social entrepreneurship ecosystem sprung up out of these ideas. They really like the idea of having companies to solve human problems, but the whole non-dividend thing that got left behind. So, however, with what Mohammed Yunus was prototyping with his Grameen family of companies, he essentially created two kinds of social businesses: a type 1 and a type 2 social business. A type 1 social business is in which your company is a vehicle for pure positive impact, and you make sure that all of the profits of your company are reinvested in the company so you can then fully promote that social mission. And the type 2 social business is when you do have financial extraction from the company, but that financial extraction goes in full to charity. Now, I didn't actually know about this when I was starting Radically Open Security, and when I decided to use this religious, model of the fiscal fundraising institution. But it turned out that inadvertently, I had accidentally implemented, Eunice's concept of a type 2 social business. Turns out I'm not the only one. There actually have also been other larger examples of corporations that have given their profits almost in full to charity. Some interesting examples are Bosch, the washing machine company. Similarly, also how do I say, Carlsberg, also the beer company. Who's giving their profits also to the how do I say, the Department of Science, basically the Academy of Science. And yeah, I mean, we need to start thinking about how we can, adapt this model. Because, as much as this extraction is the original sin of business, we also need to get it out of our social enterprises. So, with that, I hope that I have given you all some interesting food for thought. I think I'm probably a little bit over time now with my presentation, and I believe that we also wanted to have some time for Q&A. So thank you so much, Viisi, and thank you so much, Gijs, for inviting me. And of course, now I would be extremely happy to take some questions. Oh, I can't hear you, Gijs. You're muted.
There we are again. Yes, the mic was still muted. Many thanks for your inspiring presentation and your perspective on business. as it's my interpretation, is not so much about the flat economy, but more about like growth that is not exponential and taking the financial extraction out of the system. Those are, the main topics that really stuck with me. I do have some questions from, let me see where to start. First one is Tom. He mentions Tesla. You mentioned some cases in your presentation. He only states what's your opinion about Tesla, but I can imagine thinking about Tesla. On the one hand, Tesla is really driving innovation that we need for a more sustainable planet, of course. But on the other hand, the way they're doing that is through investors and exponential growth. So how's your perspective on that?
Exactly. So indeed, I think it's ambiguous whether or not Tesla is a social enterprise or not. Because, and I think part of the reason why is as much as they have a social mission and as much as they most certainly have had a positive impact, on things like electric cars, batteries, space travel, a lot of these are really great things. Elon Musk is also I think at this point, like the world's highest paid CEO. And if you look at discrepancies in payment and compensation between the lowest paid employee and the CEO, in the United States, I think the average is roughly 250 to 1 of executive compensation to the lowest paid staff member. Elon Musk is, if I recall correctly, I think 450 to 1.
Wow.
Yeah, which is just absurd. On top of that, of course, the way in which he's behaving, doing things like threatening governments, to pull out of a certain city or region because, if he has to close his factories due to COVID, thus putting his own staff in danger. I mean, it's extremely obvious that he's not optimizing for social impact quite as much as he could be. I think the problem here, yet again, is extraction. The problem is in the same way that Silicon Valley commercial companies are being groomed to essentially be, again, these revenue losing shell operations that essentially grow exponentially and are meant to basically pull a pump and dump scheme on the public markets. I can't call it anything except for that. Because of course, the final investor is the one that's left holding the bag when things go south. If the economy drops or if it's basically once the founders and the investors have cashed out, the fact that that company is revenue losing becomes somebody else's problem. So, and Elon Musk and Tesla are equally doing this. They are also revenue losing. I don't think there was ever a point where they've been revenue neutral or revenue positive. And, also the gymnastics of what they're doing also to keep the value of their stock high on the stock market. By the time, if the economy drops again, or if things don't go so well with Tesla, it's going to be the investors that invested in Tesla that are going to feel the pain of that. Probably not even Elon Musk, because by that time he'll have probably sold so many of his shares, he's going to be away scot-free. Not to mention also his early investors.
Yeah.
So. Yeah. So that's basically it. I think we should not hold Elon Musk as our hero here when trying to come up with how to create impact businesses.
Yeah. Tom also adds to his question that he's not a fan of Elon Musk, actually. That's the case of Tesla. Another case is the vegetarische slager we had here, which they stated, of course, that in order to make change and to make fundamental change in society, we needed this as a next step.
Yeah. So basically, I think that that's a really frequent justification by impact companies to make impact exits. But then we can leverage, the distribution chains of these larger companies. Yeah, okay, sure. But you could also leverage distribution chains with these larger companies by partnering them, with them. I mean, you don't necessarily have to sell to them. You don't necessarily have to get acquired by them. The fact of the matter is, as soon as you sell out, you lose control over your company.
Yeah.
As long as your desires and wishes happen to be aligned with that of the investors, then it's fine. But the moment, of course, that those that those intentions are no longer aligned, then the cultures are going to clash. The company is going to get repurposed. This is called mission drift. Also similarly looking at another popular Dutch social enterprise. Take Fairphone.
Mm-hmm.
You know, of course, Fairphone also originally started as an art project, actually coming out of the Waag. And of course, Bas van Abel, among others, had basically done a crowdfunding action. They wound up landing on a really huge pot of capital. They also did some pre-orders from KPN and other telcos. And then at that point, they were just sort of like, oh crap, now we have to build this thing.
Mm-hmm.
And then they wound up going to Shenzhen in China and, looking for so-called, basically the most fair vendors of each of the components that a super complex product as a smartphone
Mm-hmm.
would require. Of course, not surprisingly enough, Boss went back a few years later, discovered that, hey, what's going on here? All of these fair practices that we were hoping for, these haven't been implemented as much as we were hoping. And he had a crisis of conscience that actually led him to be checked into, the health facilities, because he wound up having a breakdown.
Yeah.
I'm not making this up. There's a Tafellift episode that
Mm-hmm.
actually covers this story. I think it would be very interesting if somebody someday could write a book about Fairphone and about their story. And of course, eventually, what wound up happening was with the triple bottom line, people, planet, profit. Of course, this objective of growth wound up coming into conflict, with the people and planet aspect of things, and they wound up starting to make choices between, do we optimize for growth or do we optimize for impact?
Yeah.
And especially anytime you have investors, because of course at a certain point also Fairphone got investors on board. You start coming into conflict with this, and this really started testing, the company, and you started internally. There were a bunch of people who started saying, yeah, but we want to be, a story with a product, not a product with a story. And a
Yeah.
whole bunch of people left, and eventually Boss himself resigned.
Yeah.
And he's doing other great things now. I think he's still on the board, but nonetheless, you know, the problem is it's really difficult, if not impossible, to architect supply chains, ethical supply chains from the top down.
Mm-hmm.
And that's what I think Fairphone also organically discovered. Another famous Dutch social enterprise that ran into exactly the same problem is Tony Chocolonely, who also, again, super successful social enterprise, makes amazing products. I should consume less of their product, you know. But the point is, though, that they had exactly the same problem because their original CEO, same thing, wanted to, with the best of intentions, reduce child labor, from the product of making chocolate. But then he also went back several years later, found out that the plantations that they had been using, that, hey, wait a minute, what's going on? There's children here. This wasn't the intention, you know? And what you wind up getting, is a Fairphone that's not completely fair, or child slave labor free chocolate that still isn't completely child slave
Yeah.
labor free. And the problem is when you start, with these investors, and growth at a certain point becomes the imperative, even if you're trying to find that balance, as long as that profit motive is in there, it's going to derail things. And it's not necessarily the fault of the entrepreneurs, because they're working within the system of social impact, social enterprise that were being handed down, and that were being taught, by places like Impact Hub and Social Enterprise NL and all these other, places, these parts of the social impact ecosystem. Nobody here is at fault because, this is basically just a story, that
Mm-hmm.
we've all been told and that we're all buying into. But
Yeah.
what we can do is we can look at this critically and start to say, you know, where has the Silicon Valley mindset, where has it invaded our, you know, our will to do good, you know, and our the, you know, the systems and the tools that we're using as social entrepreneurs to actually, you know, carry this out. You know, and by and large, I think that most people, when they're actually confronted with this, are super open-minded, you
Mhm.
know, and they just realize that, you know, it's like realizing that you're in the matrix. You know,
Yeah.
suddenly you step back and you're like, oh shit, what is all this? What am I doing in here? You know, and that's when you're left with the choice of, you know, do I take the red pill or do I take the blue pill? You know, do I go back to business as usual or do I hunt for a new way? You know, and I think right now we are finding ourselves at this crossroads. You know,
Yeah.
we're starting to be confronted with what the system is, with what incarnation it's taking, and with what it actually means. You know,
Yeah.
and this leaves us with an opportunity. You know, now in these corona times, you know, we keep saying, you know, we need to build the new normal. You know, it's obvious that things are broken, but we need to architect the new normal. This is our chance to do it. You know, you know, and if we can start, you know, it starts with a discourse and including, you know, with discussions like we're having right here,
Hmm.
right now, you know, on this this VC cast. But you know, if we can get people thinking, you know, is growth good? You know, is extraction good? You know, how can we eliminate the extraction from our companies?
Yeah.
You know, what does profit mean? You know, with profit, are we talking about reinvested turnover or are we talking about extraction? See, the thing is, there's a subtle double meaning in the word profit that most of us don't even realize is there until we actually stop and think about it. You know, if we can start creating a discourse of this and start creating new, you know, additions to our education system. So, you know, and this is what I'm trying to do with post growth entrepreneurship. You know, we need classes that can teach the next generation of business students, you know, about these systems and these frameworks and give them choices and alternatives, you know. So, what we're
And
doing with
we need classes, but also I think we need new heroic stories, like not the heroic stories of Elon Musk and Tesla, because everybody dreams of building a company like those.
right.
But instead, we need heroic stories of yours, actually, your company, and how you are doing, how you're changing the world of doing business.
Well, we need more than just my story because one story is a curiosity,
Mm.
you know, but we need to build a community of entrepreneurs that are actually building this. You know, post growth theory, you know, macroeconomic theory is one thing, but that's why we need the post growth entrepreneurship. We need to actually build this and we need to do this. We need to show this and demonstrate this and have living, breathing companies with books that we can open, you know, and revenue that we can measure to win over the skeptics and actually show them how this not only can be viable business, but that this can be good business.
Yeah. Talking about books, a very practical question. Bas is questioning: if you have to choose between donut economy or prosperity without growth, which one would it be? He's too many books to read, so that's why he's asking.
I'll actually give you a different book. It's called Throwing Rocks at the Google Bus by Douglas Rushkoff. So this is a really good account of how business got to the place where it's at, and sort of where do we go next. He also definitely goes into details about how the current startup ecosystem operates and what the problem with that is. And I think that this book absolutely should be required reading for anyone who's even thinking about starting a company.
Mhm. Okay, cool. Another question, because we talked about cases of Tesla, the vegetarische slager, a very personal case also by Bas. He's asking or saying, I'm working for a company that is being bought by an investment company, and he's worried that from now on it will all be about profit. He's an optimist, but he doesn't want to be naive. So, what would your advice for him be?
I think his fears are real.
Hmm.
Because oftentimes when you are acquired by those kinds of companies, I mean, it is somewhat going to derail the company. But this is sort of the problem with, having investors in the first place. This is sort of why I think we need to start with brand new companies. In the security space, we have this tenet that's called secure by design. So, in other words, if you want to make something secure, you need to build that security into the core. You just can't slap security on to an existing thing like a band-aid afterwards and then think that the whole thing is secure. It doesn't work that way.
Yeah.
It's the same thing with ethics in companies. You need to have companies that are ethical by design. You can't just slap a corporate social responsibility band-aid on the
Mm.
outside of this giant existing thing and then think that the whole thing is going to be ethical. So really, I think what we need to do is we need to start with the next generation. Now, I've attempted to do this. So 2.5 years ago, I created a post-growth startup incubator called Nonprofit Ventures. And we have been giving workshops and trainings and startup boot camps to aspiring post-growth entrepreneurs. So, for example, in March, this past March, right before the COVID lockdowns, we
Mhm.
had a 1 week startup boot camp in Terschelling. Actually, some of the video footage from Tegelicht 2 Sundays ago, that was actually filmed during our startup boot camp
Mhm.
in Terschelling. And what it was is it was a combination of a personal development retreat and a startup boot camp. So on the one hand, we had things like, meditation, like 15 minutes before breakfast, 15 minutes before dinner. We had people doing something called the morning pages. So in other words, 3 pages of longhand writing first thing in the morning, which is a tool that we took from The Artist's Way by Julia
Mhm.
Cameron, which is meant as a way to like cage your monkey mind and kind of release blockages so we can promote where we can enhance creativity. These kinds of tools, also things like walks on the beach and on the dunes, and some people went for morning swims. But at the same time, it was also a startup boot camp, so they had business model canvases to fill
Mm.
in, and we had mentors available, and we also had lectures on, on bookkeeping and legal documents and actually the nitty gritty and the nuts and the bolts of what you need to create also solid business models and solid value propositions to actually deliver their product or service onto the market. So it really combined those two elements because sort of to be sort of a whole entrepreneur, you need to also be a whole human. And we need to spend just as much time looking at who am I, and how can I make my business be an expression of myself, of who I am, of my dreams, my desires, of what I want to leave my legacy as. And what I like to say is, business is one of the most effective forms of activism. You know,
Yeah. Yeah.
business can be a mixed media for art. Business can be a vehicle for your spirituality. I mean, okay, all of this sounds a little bit nuts and Zweverich and but if you think about it, you know, right livelihood is one of the Buddhist noble eightfold paths. And even the Pope, look, I don't agree with everything the Pope says and does, but the Pope wrote an encyclical on economic growth, basically talking about how we need to address these issues, and it's even, our spiritual duty, you know. So
Yeah.
I think we need to start embracing business in this framework. Too many of us think that business has to be evil. Too many of us think that business has to be boring and commercial and stodgy and selfish. Greed is good.
Yeah.
But this is not the narrative that we need. I think we need to think about entrepreneurship as in being a hero's journey. Like Joseph Campbell. And sort of thinking, if my life and if my journey as an entrepreneur and the journey of my business, if this were a theater play, a theater
Mhm.
production that we were having in Carré, and I was the hero of this story, how would I want to do this, and how would I want to portray things in
Yeah.
such a way that I am telling the story that I want to be telling, not through words, but through my everyday actions? And how can
Yeah.
I, find a north star of meaning and purpose that guides me, but then find dramatic unity between my everyday actions and my tiniest operational decisions in my business and get that aligned with that North Star. We need to be asking questions like that, because until we do, we're going to continue perpetuating all of the problems that we're finding ourselves in.
Yeah. Yeah. I'm looking at the clock, and as a final question, I'm still sitting in Carré looking at your play. You were already mentioning your dreams and your ambitions. So I'm curious, if we fast forward 10 years in time, still looking at your play, what will be for Radical E Open Security, or for you personally, what will be your biggest achievement in 10 years' time?
Well, if I can let my fantasy one run wild here, I'll
Please
tell you the way
do,
that
please do.
I would love to see it go. So basically, I want to get this post-growth entrepreneurship class. It's already worth 6 ECTS points as a course. I'm sorry, as an internship. I want to make sure that
Hmm.
we get this a full-fledged course. This is already in the process of happening, but Corona slowed it down because the
Yeah.
universities got a bit distracted by things like online education. No problem. Let's get this done. That's the first step. Second step, we're working right now with the University of Amsterdam on producing a MOOC, in other words, a massive online course that we're going to put out on the Coursera platform. We're part of the way through recording this already. Yeah, let's get this on Coursera. And what I want is that every business student in the world is going to see this, and they're going to think, post-growth entrepreneurship, University of Amsterdam, that's interesting. And then they're going to watch it and say, what is this? This is weird, mind blown. Why is this not in my business school? And then I want also, like nonprofit ventures is being an incubator for post-growth startups. We can also work together with existing incubators to integrate this line of thought. Why should we have to reinvent the wheel, with our incubators? Let's make use of the existing incubators and rather start to feed new thoughts, into their processes and into their cohorts, so we can actually start pumping out more post-growth entrepreneurs. This builds, more post-growth companies. It starts with one. At a certain point, it increases to 10. It starts with the idealists, the people like you and me, who are willing to act as founders, who are willing to pull the cart, so to speak. But we bring everyone else who's less idealistic along with us, because we create the job opportunities, and 99% of the people in the world are good. So if you give people a choice, do you want to work for this super ultra corporation over here, or would you rather work for this, value driven, post-growth company that donates to charity? For the average person, I think it's a pretty easy decision to make, as long as the compensation is roughly similar.
Yeah.
So, we start pulling the rest of the world along with us. And the more cash that we can redirect out of the corporate ecosystem towards charity, towards social causes, towards, this post-growth economy that can coexist next to the commercial industry. It isn't winner takes all. We can be there at the same time. We can even work together, to a certain extent. In fact, we need the commercial ecosystem and government to procure from us, to buy from us, even to enable our economy to grow. But at the same time, think about the effects this can have. Just imagine wildly if we had a post-growth company that could be a post-growth, say, accountancy firm that could become as big as a Deloitte or an Accenture or an Ernst & Young. And imagine if those profits got redirected towards a universal basic income pilot in the Netherlands. This
I
could
like the way
change
this
everything.
play goes. I like the way this play goes and ends up. Cool.
Right.
So I'm really sticking to this play, because I want to see how this ends. Many thanks, Melanie, for your kind words, your inspiration to all of us, and to all our viewers at home. Many thanks for tuning in to this Viisi talk. If you have any questions, please still post them in the chat, and I will redirect those to Melanie. Okay.
Thanks.
Thank you,
And
and have a good day.
yeah.
Oh, yeah.
And One last final word. If any of you all are inspired or interested or have questions or comments or even or criticisms or anything at all, I'd like to ask you to do two things. One, connect with me on LinkedIn. I'm fairly active on LinkedIn, and I can loop you in. I'd be more than happy to talk to you. I'm mentoring people. We can get you involved with nonprofit ventures with our incubator, and this is how you can get involved. The second thing that I want to say is if you want more information, besides my LinkedIn feed, please also have a look at postgrowthentrepreneurship.com. There's a TEDx video there, but there's also a workshop that I had recorded. It's a little bit outdated now, but it's still 6 hours of educational videos that are enough to give you a good, well-grounded basis in post-growth entrepreneurship. This is available free of charge with a Creative Commons license. So thank you.
Cool. Great tips. Many thanks once again. And to all our viewers, have a good rest of the day. Bye-bye.